Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. So we talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Ernst Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. Wow, two games that we just witnessed in the college football playoff. Both had drama. Both games were fantastic, and they both went down to the wire in the final play. You can't ask for much more than this, and the games really went about how I expected, even though I did pick one of the games right and I picked one of the games wrong. I had Alabama knocking off the Michigan Wolverines, and for the vast majority of the game, it looked like the Crimson Tide were going to be able to knock off Michigan, but they couldn't get it done. Washington, I picked them to beat Texas, and boy, did they survive, but there were a lot of late game antics that almost cost them the game. But I'm going to give you my thoughts and reactions on both of these games and offer a quick preview as well of the national championship matchup between the Washington Huskies and the Michigan Wolverines. There's a lot to get into, so let's dive right in. Now, the first game between Alabama and Michigan, I thought it was going to be a game in the mid-20s. Even though I did pick Alabama to win, I had them winning 28-24 over Michigan. I thought that it would be a defensive grudge match and that neither team was really going to get a whole lot of separation. And that's exactly what occurred. Alabama, in the early stages of the game, yes, they had some ups and downs, but Jalen Milroe, he kind of found a groove in the middle of the game, and they were starting to run the football fairly well. And Alabama was up 20-13, and it looked like they were in pretty good shape. Michigan had a lot of mistakes early that, to me, looked like it was going to cost them the game because Alabama was able to hang around because at one point Michigan was winning 13-10 at the half, but they should have been leading by more. And I tweeted that during the game because if Michigan didn't have those mistakes, they also muffed an extra point as well that I thought might come back to bite them, but it ultimately ended up not mattering because they were able to win the game. That hurt as well. And then they missed a field goal in the second half. So Michigan had tons of mistakes. A lot of it was on the holder, on those muff field goal attempts and extra point attempt, but still, it's a mistake. And Michigan, you cannot have those type of mistakes in a college football playoff game against the Alabama Crimson Tide. But Alabama just could not pull away either. And Jalen Milroe had a costly fumble. Even though for the most part he played well, that fumble really was a turning point in the game. It looked like Alabama was seizing control of the game. They could have gone up 2 scores if Bama didn't turn it over, but he did. Then Michigan eventually was able to score on that final possession that they had in regulation, and then Alabama couldn't do anything in response. So it went to overtime, and Michigan scored and Alabama didn't. Blake Corum had 2 easy runs to get in the end zone in overtime, and Alabama went down to 4th and goal at the goal line. Jalen Milroe was not able to get anything done there. Questionable play call by Alabama to try to run the ball up the middle. I didn't agree with that. You got to put Jalen Milroe in space. You have to be able to give him that option to throw the ball to Bond or one of the other receivers or be able to run to the outside. But instead, they tried to run on Michigan's defensive line on the final play. It did not work at all whatsoever. And Alabama also had a lot of snap props. You talk about Michigan having some holding issues on their field goal attempts. Alabama, the center struggled snapping the ball to Jalen Milroe. There were a lot of bad snaps that Jalen Milroe tried to handle, and some of them he did not handle very well, even though it's not really Milroe's fault when some of the snaps were that bad. But there were mistakes by both of these teams. For both of these teams to be so talented, there was some very sloppy play. And yes, nobody's perfect, and there's always going to be mistakes in football games, but still, both of these teams were playing nowhere near as good as you know that they could have. And Michigan, even though their mistakes cost them more points than Alabama did, at the end of the day, Michigan just did enough to tie the game, send it to overtime. And when games get to overtime, anything can happen. So Michigan, Alabama, game went exactly as I expected, but Alabama fell on the short end of the stick. I don't really think either team necessarily did anything super significant that helped them win or lose. I just feel like Michigan was able to punch it in overtime. It just seemed like Alabama's defense might have been running on fumes toward the end of the game, and that ended up being the difference. Both teams made a lot of mistakes, but the Wolverines found a way to win, and they're going to be going on to the national championship game to face the Washington Huskies. And let's get into this other game real quick, because Washington, Texas, this should not have been a close game. Washington, it looked like they were dominating Texas throughout the game. Washington muffed a punt return, and that helped Texas stay in the game in the first half, but Washington was outgaining Texas big time, kind of like how Michigan was over Alabama in the first half, but Alabama was still able to hang around despite Michigan having a lot more yards in that first half. Ultimately, Michigan was able to survive. And the same happened here. Washington was outgaining Texas, but the Longhorns kept hanging around. Washington just kept not doing enough to pull away, and Texas was doing a good job on the ground in the first half. And then the game ended up being tied 21-all at the half, even though Washington definitely outgained Texas. Quinn Ewers, he did not play a bad game overall, but Texas's passing attack never really kicked into full gear. Their running game played well early, but it did struggle late in the second half. And you look at Washington, Michael Penix played a great game, 430 passing yards. He definitely deserved the player of the game. But the issue with this game is because Washington should have easily won. It was 37-28, and there's only a couple minutes left in the game. It's out of reach, basically. All they got to do is just prevent Texas from scoring quick, and Washington should be fine. And they really didn't. There was only like a minute left in the game. Texas kicks a field goal, and they cut the game 37-31. All Washington has to do is run out the clock, but then Dylan Johnson, for whatever reason, Washington decided to run the football. I guess they thought that running a little more time off by running the football, since Texas had those couple timeouts, was a smart decision. Instead of kneeling the ball and not as much time would come off, but Dylan Johnson gets injured, and then that allows more time to stay on the clock. Texas would have only had like 15 seconds left in the game, basically would have been over, but instead there was like 50 seconds left. And then Washington get kick catch interference on the Texas punt returner, and then Texas went all the way down the field. It looked like the Longhorns were going to do the unthinkable and come back and win in the All-State Sugar Bowl, knock off Washington 38-37, and then they were going to be able to move on to the national championship game. But Washington's defense, which was an underrated part of this game, Washington's defense was highly criticized coming into this matchup. Would they be able to slow down Texas' offense? They struggled at times, but they did just enough. And on that final drive, that shouldn't have been as tense as it ended up being because of Washington's mistakes leading up to that point, the Huskies survived. They won 37-31, and I picked Washington to win 38-35. So I have both these score predictions so close to what they ended up being. Got the Huskies right. Michigan, they won instead of my pick in Alabama. But both of these games were fantastic. You couldn't ask for any more on this New Year's Day. I hope everybody had a happy New Year's. These games were awesome. Washington should have never let it come to that point where Texas was almost able to win, but they found a way. That's just the way Washington has been all year. Washington has won all of their last 10 games by 12 points or less, which has never happened before in the AP era. That is a first. So Washington, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. They're a fantastic team with Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, and Michael Penix, the head of the snake. They need Dylan Johnson back healthy, hopefully, for the national championship game. If he can't play, that would be a tough loss for them. But Washington is a really good football team, and they proved that in this game. Alabama, they're not as good as they were earlier in Nick Saban's tenure, but they still have a lot of talent. Jalen Milroe played his heart out, but the Michigan Wolverines, Jim Harbaugh, is he going to be going off to the NFL if they find a way to win a national title? Who knows? But the Wolverines, they needed to do this. That's something I didn't mention earlier when talking about the game. The Wolverines, with all that talent returning, Blake Corum, Roman Wilson, J.J. McCarthy, and all those defensive players, they needed to win this game over the Alabama Crimson Tide. It would have been very disappointing for them to lose with Alabama not being as strong of a team this year, even though they still got tons of talent. Isaiah Bond, Jace McClellan, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Terrion Arnold. It goes on and on. Dallas Turner as well, along with Jalen Milroe. Nick Saban had a great team, but Alabama had some weaknesses, and Michigan found a way to win. They have a shot to win a national title. Maybe send off Jim Harbaugh to the NFL if he chooses to leave. It'd be great for Michigan fans if he stays. And if Dylan Johnson's out for Washington, that will definitely help Michigan possibly be able to knock off the Huskies. Washington has a potent passing attack, so Michigan is going to have to do everything they can on defense to be able to slow down Washington's offense like they did with Alabama. Did a good enough job in that game. And for Washington, their defense is going to have to play as opportunistic as they did against Texas, against Michigan, because they cannot allow Michigan to score a lot of points, but Michigan can't allow Washington to score in the 30s either. I believe Michigan operates much better in these lower style games in the 20s. That's why they were able to knock off the Ohio State Buckeyes. They were now able to knock off Alabama. So it's going to be really interesting. I can't wait for the national championship game, but those are my thoughts on both these games. They were very well played games. Both were entertaining to watch. These were probably the two best college football playoff semifinal games back to back, because usually you have one good game and then the other's a dub, but both these games were fantastic, and you definitely couldn't ask for anything more on these college football football playoff semifinal games on New Year's Day. And hopefully the national championship game is just as good as these two games. But congratulations to the Michigan Wolverines and the Washington Huskies for advancing to the finals and possibly be able to win their first national championship in the college football playoff era. And it would be Washington's first title since 1991 and Michigan's first title since 1997. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about these two college football playoff semifinal games. Which game you enjoyed more? Which game had you more on the edge of your seat? I'm sure both of them did. And how you thought the games went compared to how you expected. And what you think about the national championship matchup between Washington and Michigan. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description. And I'll see you next time.